Bom dia. Bem-vindas, bem-vindos a mais uma mesa da Flip Angico. Eu queria muito agradecer a presença das nossas convidadas, Ayelet Gundar-Goshen e a Ayòbámi Adébáyò. E obrigada pela presença de vocês. E apresentar a nossa mediadora, Lilia Schwartz. Ela veio muitas vezes aqui fazer essas mediações, veio como convidada da Flip já também. Ela é professora em Princeton e na Universidade de São Paulo, autora, editora, enfim. Obrigada. Obrigada.
Bom dia a todos. Boa tarde, na verdade, a todos, todas, todes. Muito obrigada ao pessoal que está aqui na tenda e também no telão. Como eu expliquei a elas, há um pessoal no telão nos ouvindo. E eu queria apenas dizer que é uma alegria fazer a moderação dessa sessão com essas duas autoras de países tão distantes, mas cujas realidades, vocês verão, dialogam tanto. Elas são em primeiro lugar, duas grandes narradoras, duas grandes storytellers. Né? Elas sabem contar uma história, vão contar várias histórias aqui. Em segundo lugar, eu diria que os dois livros que nós vamos conversar hoje, o Fique Comigo, da Ayòbámi, que saiu para HarperCollins, Uma Noite Markovitch, da Ayelet, que saiu pela Todavia, são duas histórias de amor. Amores daqueles que são, de fato, impossíveis, que se tratam de relações consentidas, não consentidas ou secretamente consentidas. Essas são também histórias que se passam em sociedades que podem ser consideradas, sob muitos aspectos e, ao mesmo tempo, sociedades modernas, mas também bastante provincianas, como a nossa, por sinal. Essas também são histórias que tratam de maternidade e de luto. Histórias que estão e não estão intimamente conectadas aos contextos sociais, culturais e políticos em que elas vivem. Israel e Nigéria. Enfim, eu não vou falar muito mais, porque eu não quero dar nenhum spoiler aqui. Prometo que vou tentar. E eu vou passar, então, a apresentar as duas escritoras para, então, animar o diálogo com elas. Ayòbámi Adébáyò, nós ensaiamos para ver se eu falava corretamente, nasceu em Lagos, na Nigéria, em 1988. Ela se graduou e fez mestrado em literatura anglófona na Universidade de Ibafemi, Awolo, em Ifé. Ela também tem mestrado em escrita criativa pela Universidade de East Anglia. A Ayòbámi trabalha como editora da Saraba Magazine desde 2009, e Fique Comigo é o seu primeiro romance, e mesmo assim foi eleito como um dos melhores de 2017 pelos jornais The New York Times, The Guardian, The Economist. Muito bem-vinda.
Thank you.
Vou também introduzir a Ayelet Gundar-Goshen. It's correct, não? Nasceu em Israel e tem um mestrado em psicologia pela Universidade de Tel Aviv. Na época em que ela ainda desenvolvia o seu mestrado, a Ayelet também trabalhou como jornalista e editora do jornal Yediot. Now I failed completely. Aronot. Estudou igualmente como roteirista na Sun Spiegel Film e na Television School em Jerusalém. Ela atua como psicóloga clínica e dá aulas de psicologia na Universidade de Tel Aviv e no Holon Institute of Technology. A Ayelet colabora regularmente em jornais como BBC, na The Cultural Frontline e, ocasionalmente, no Financial Times, Time Magazine e The Telegraph. Ela tem uma produção muito importante como roteirista de TV e cinema. Quem sabe nós vamos ter tempo de falar. Em Israel. Uma de suas histórias de maior sucesso, Batman and the Checkpoint, ganhou um prêmio em Berlim, Berlin Today Award, como melhor curta de 2012. A Ayelet estreou na literatura em 2012 também, com o romance que nós vamos conversar hoje, Uma Noite Markovitch, e escreveu, com esse romance, ela ganhou o Sapphire Prize em 2013 e mais 2 outros prêmios, um na Itália em 2016, outro na França em 2017. Sua segunda novela se chama Waking Lions e é de 2014, sairá no ano que vem no Brasil. Seu terceiro livro se chama The Liar, A Mentirosa, é de 2018. Ayelet, muito bem-vinda aqui. Bom, então, eu queria também dizer, antes de começar a nossa conversa, que o pessoal da Flip está distribuindo papéis, vocês podem enviar perguntas por escrito, e eu terei uma grande alegria em transmiti-las para as 2 palestrantes. Bom, vou começar conversando com a Ayòbámi pelo final do livro dela. No final do livro, nos agradecimentos que aparecem na última página do livro, ela agradece Yedige e Akin Aijá, que são os personagens principais desse romance, do livro Fique Comigo. Eu gostaria que você nos falasse um pouquinho sobre a relação que você estabelece, que os escritores estabelecem durante o processo de escrita com os seus personagens.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I mean, with this novel, Stay With Me, I began thinking about it actually in my final year of university. That was in 2008. And I had written a short story that became very clear to me soon after completing the short story that it needed to be something bigger, because it felt like the characters wouldn't just go away. So I would literally walk into a room and I would see somebody that would remind me of either Yejide, who's the wife in the novel, or Akin, who's the husband in the novel. I kind of walked around with these characters for about a year, and then in 2010, 2011, I began to work on the novel and continued to work on it for another 5 years. So by the time I was done, they felt like people that I had gotten to know. It sounds a little bit weird, but they seemed very real to me. So that by the time I stopped working on the final chapter of the novel, I felt that they continued to live their lives somewhere that I wasn't aware of. It was almost like I just walked out of the room and their lives continued. So that's sort of the relationship I had with these characters. And it tends to be the relationship I have with characters that I write about. You know, I tend to think about things for a couple of weeks or a year before I actually put words down. So I feel like I've lived with the characters for a certain period of time.
And do you miss them?
I mean, I used to, not anymore. I mean, when I came to the end of the novel, I had a period of about a month where I was a bit unhappy. You know, it felt like I'd lost someone or a couple of people in my life, in a sense. But I think I've sort of moved on. I'm seeing other people now, so I'm fine.
Meeting other people is good. Thank you. Ayelet, em Uma Noite Markovitch, você apresenta um plot que, se não fosse verdadeiro, pareceria quase do estilo do realismo fantástico. Esse plot, e eu não vou estragar o livro de ninguém, porque logo no começo do livro nós ficamos sabendo, a história central e a história inicial, ela se passa nos primeiros anos da Segunda Guerra Mundial, com uma Europa ocupada por tropas da Alemanha nazista, e jovens mulheres judias fecham acordos de casamentos arranjados, né, com homens, também judeus, que elas nunca viram, eles moram na Palestina, e o acordo é que, tão logo eles cheguem de navio na Palestina, todos vão se divorciar. Um não, apenas um. Essa é uma história real, a Ayelet nos conta. Então, a minha primeira pergunta para você é: quando e de que maneira você inclui na história real o seu espaço subjetivo e ficcional? Resumindo, quais são as fronteiras entre ficção e não ficção na produção de um livro como esse?
So first I will say hello, shalom. I'm very excited to be here, very honored. I will say that the story of Markovich sort of bumped into me the first time I heard it. I was visiting the house of my partner, my boyfriend back then, and I was visiting the house for the first time, and this was this awkward silence that you have when you visit a family that you don't know. And in this awkward silence, I saw this house across the fence, and I asked who lives there. And then he told me that beautiful Bella lives there, and that she's the most beautiful woman in the whole wide world. So obviously, as a woman, I immediately felt, who is this beautiful Bella? And then he told me, don't worry, because beautiful Bella is above 80, so it's not a competition. And she's also the most miserable woman in the world, because she's married to the most terrible person in the world. So when somebody tells you the most beautiful woman and the most terrible man, then automatically your ears are like this, if you like stories, and I'm addicted to stories. And then they told me this story, which is a true story about a very heroic operation that went terribly wrong. This man was supposed to sail to Europe to marry a woman in order to save her life so she can get out of Nazi Germany. And he was supposed to bring her to mandatory Palestine and divorce her. And that's a very noble and heroic thing to do, because he was risking his life going into Nazi Europe to save her. But then during the road, he fell so madly in love with her that when they reached Israel, he refused to let her go. So all of a sudden, he switched from being this ultimate hero into being this ultimate villain. I mean, what kind of man holds a woman against her will because of religious Jewish law? So this story, this real story, haunted me. I came home that night and I kept thinking, what kind of man can do such a thing? And then I thought, I'm a psychologist, so I thought it's too easy to just say a monster or a villain or the bad guy, you know, from Disney films or Marvel films, like the ultimate bad guy. It's too easy. And I thought, what is it that could make me hold on to something even though I know it's not mine? What is it that makes people hold on to a person or to a memory or to a piece of land even though we know that it's not ours? And I think this was the moment when I put the real people aside. I actually didn't want to see them. Whenever I came visiting, I did everything I could not to look to this house because I didn't want reality to be mixed with the story. It's like you get to a junction and the storyteller turns right and the historian turns left. So we start from the same junction, but I felt like I have to be free to tell the story of my own characters and not to be too much connected to the real man who perhaps he was just a monster.
Durante a realização do livro, é possível ver que o Markovich, em vez de ser o vilão, como você disse, é a pessoa central na história, né? Ele acaba sendo a pessoa que conduz a história, não é? Yeah.
It was very important for me that he will not be just a monster or a villain. I really wanted him to be a real character, somebody that you care about, not just judge, but really care about.
Bom, já que nós estamos falando do Yakov Markovich, acho que você poderia ler para a gente, a Ayelet vai ler uma passagem em hebraico e vocês podem acompanhar, porque a HarperCollins deixou a mesma passagem aí onde vocês se sentaram. Desculpa, a todavia. E depois a Ayelet pediu para que eu continuasse. Então, ela começa e eu continuo a leitura e depois nós falamos sobre isso.
So we'll do the first paragraph in Hebrew, and then we'll shift. You have it? Yeah. יעקב מרקוביץ' לא היה מכוער. אין להסיק מכך שהיה יפה. ילדות קטנות לא פרצו בבכי למראהו, אך גם לא חייכו אל מול פניו. הוא היה, אפשר לומר, ממוצע לתפארת. יותר מכך, פניו של יעקב מרקוביץ' היו חסרות ייחוד להפליא. חסרות ייחוד עד כדי כך שהעין לא הצליחה להשתהות עליהן. החליקה הלאה לעצמים אחרים. עץ בפינת הרחוב, חתול בקרן זווית. כדי להמשיך ולשוטט בשיממון פניו של יעקב מרקוביץ' דרוש היה מאמץ עצום. בני האדם אינם ששים להשקיע מאמצים עצומים. וכך יצא שרק לעתים רחוקות הביטו האנשים ארוכות בפניו. היו לזה גם יתרונות. מפקד הכיתה עמד עליהם. הוא הביט בפניו של יעקב מרקוביץ' בדיוק את משך הזמן שהיה דרוש לו, ואז הסיר את מבטו. מפקד הכיתה אמר, אתה תבריח נשק. עם הפנים האלו, איש לא ישים לב. והוא צדק. יעקב מרקוביץ' הבריח נשק, אולי יותר מכל חבר אחר בארגון. ומעולם לא היה אפילו קרוב להתאפס. מבטם של החיילים הבריטים החליק על פניו כמו שמן על אקדח. אם העריכו חברי הארגון את יעקב מרקוביץ' על תעוזתו, לא ידע. מעטים פנו אליו בדברים.
Quando não estava contrabandeando armas, trabalhava no campo. Nos fins da tarde, sentava-se no quintal da casa e alimentava pombos com migalhas de pão. Muito rapidamente, reunia-se lá um bando permanente que comia de sua mão e pousava em seu ombro. Se os garotos da comunidade agrícola o vissem, certamente cairiam na risada. Mas ninguém pulava a cerca de pedra. À noite, ele lia textos de Jabotinsky. Uma vez por mês, viajava para Haifa e transava com uma mulher, a quem pagava. Às vezes, era a mesma. Às vezes, era outra. Não se detinha no rosto delas, nem elas no dele. Yakov Markovich tinha um amigo, Zef Feinberg. Era, antes de mais nada, um bigode à frente dos olhos azuis, das sobrancelhas espessas, dos dentes afiados. O bigode era famoso em toda a região e, segundo alguns, no país inteiro. Quando um membro do Irgun voltou de uma operação no sul, contou que uma garota, enrubescendo, perguntou se o sultão bigodudo ainda estava conosco. Todos riram, e Zé Feinberg, mais do que todos. Quando fazia, o bigode tremia tempestuosamente em ondas sucessivas, trepidante e alegre, como estivera seu dono entre as coxas da garota. Era evidente que Zé Feinberg não estava destinado a contrabandear armas, porque seu bigode o antecedia como se fosse um desfile de pontos de exclamação pretos. Era preciso ser cego e bobo para não o notar. De fato, os ingleses eram bobos, mas seria demasiado otimismo supor que também fossem cegos. Se Zé Feinberg não podia contrabandear armas, ele sabia afugentar árabes muito bem. Isso ele fez em muitas noites nos arredores da colônia. Bom, agora penso que eu vou pedir para você ler o trecho que você nos selecionou e depois nós conversamos. Que tal?
Yeah.
Vocês vão... Bom, quem não fala que tem a tradução agora. Por favor, desculpa.
So I'm reading from chapter 5. I'm starting in the middle. And by this point in the novel, the characters who are married to each other, Ake and Yejide, have been married for about 5 years. They don't have any children. And Aken's family has brought a second wife into the marriage. And Yejide is going to visit her mother-in-law. So this is from a perspective. I believed I was Mommy's favorite daughter-in-law. As a child, it was expected that I would call my stepmothers Mommy. Even my father encouraged me to, but I refused. I stuck to calling them Mama. And whenever my father was not around, some of the women would slap me just because I refused to honor them by calling them my mother. I did not refuse because I was being stubborn or trying to defy them, as a number of them concluded. My mother had become an obsession for me, a religion, and the very thought of referring to another woman as mother seemed sacrilegious. a betrayal of the woman who had given up her life for me to live. One year, the Anglican church my family attended celebrated Mothering Sunday with a special service. After the vicar delivered his sermon, he summoned everyone who was below the age of 18 to the front of the church because he wanted us to honor mothers with a song. I must have been 12 at the time, but I didn't get up until an usher poked me in the back. We sang a song that everyone already knew, an expansion of the popular saying. I managed the first line. Iyani wura, iyani wura, iyebiye. Tia kole fowora. Before biting my tongue to choke back tears, the words, "Mother is gold, mother is treasured gold that cannot be bought with money," resonated with me more than any homily I'd ever heard. I knew by then that my mother could not be replaced with money by a stepmother or anyone else, and I was sure that I would never call any woman mommy. Yet, every time Akin's mother wrapped me in a fleshy embrace, my heart sang, "Mommy." And when I called her the venerated title, it did not cling to my throat and refuse to climb out the way it used to when my stepmothers tried to slap it out of me. She lived up to the name, taking my side if any issue I had with Akin came to her attention, assuring me that it was a matter of time before I got pregnant for our son, insisting that my miracle would be waiting once I turned the right corner. When Mrs. Adeolu, a pregnant customer, told me about the mountain of jaw-dropping victory, I went to Mommy that same day to discuss it with her. I needed her to authenticate the information. She was a treasure house of knowledge about such things. Even if she did not know anything about a miracle house, she usually knew whom to ask, and once she had checked out the stories, she was always prepared to accompany me to the ends of the earth to seek a new solution. There was a time when I would have ignored Mrs. Adeolu's words, a time when I did not believe in prophets who lived on mountains or priests who worshipped beside rivers. That was before I had so many tests done in the hospital, and every one of them showed that there was nothing preventing me from getting pregnant. I hoped at one point that the doctors would find something wrong, anything to explain why my period still showed up every month, years after my marriage. I wished they would find something they could treat or cut. They found nothing. Akin also went in to get tested and came back saying that the doctors had found nothing wrong with him. Then I stopped waving aside my mother-in-law's suggestions, stopped thinking that women like her were uncivilized and a little crazy. I became open to alternatives. If I was not getting what I wanted in one place, what was wrong with searching elsewhere? My parents-in-law lived in Ayesa, an old section of town that still had a few mud houses. Their house was a brick building with a front yard partially enclosed by a low cement fence. When I arrived at the house, Mommy was sitting on a low stool in the front yard, shelling groundnuts into a rusty tray that sat on her lap. She looked up as I approached and looked down again. I swallowed and my steps slowed. There was something wrong. Mommy always greeted me by shouting, "Yejide, my wife." The words were as warm as the embrace that usually followed them. "Good evening, Mommy." My knees trembled as they touched the concrete floor. "Are you pregnant now?" she said without looking up from the tray of groundnuts. I scratched my head. "Are you barren and deaf too?" I say, "Are you pregnant?" The answer is either yes, I am pregnant, or no, I still haven't been pregnant for a single day in my life. I don't know. I stood up and backed away until she was not within the reach of my clenched fist. "Why won't you allow my son to have a child?" She slapped the tray of groundnuts on the floor and stood up. "I don't manufacture children. God does." She marched towards me and spoke when her toes were touching the tips of my shoes. Have you ever seen God in a labor ward giving birth to a child? Tell me, Yejide, have you ever seen God in the labor room? Women manufacture children, and if you can't, you're just a man. Nobody should call you a woman. She gripped my wrists and lowered her voice to a whisper. This life is not difficult, Yejide. If you cannot have children, allow my son to have some with Fumi. See, we're not asking you to stand up from your place in his life. We're just saying you should shift so that someone else can sit down. I'm not stopping him, Mommy, I said. I've accepted her. She even spends the weekends in our house now. She held her thick waist and laughed. I'm a woman too. Do you think I was born last night? Tell me, why has Aki never touched Fumi? He has been married to her for over 2 months. Tell me why he has not removed her wrapper once. Tell me, Ejide. I stifled a smile. It's not my business what Akin does with his wife. Mommy lifted my blouse and laid a wrinkled palm on my stomach. Flat as the side of a wall, she said. You've had my son between your legs for 2 more months, and still your stomach is flat. Close your thighs to him, I beg you. We all know how he feels about you. If you don't chase him away, he won't touch for me. If you don't, he will die childless. I beg you, don't spoil my life. He is my first son, Yejide. I beg you in the name of God. I closed my eyes, but tears still forced their way past my eyelids. Mommy sighed. I have been good to you. I beg you in the name of God, Yejide, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me. She held me then, pulled me into her arms and muttered words of comfort. I embraced held no warmth. A word sat in my stomach, cold and hard, where a baby should have been. Thank you.
Ayòbámi, essa é uma história de amor, como eu dizia no começo aqui da nossa conversa, e uma história cortada pela tensão da questão da maternidade, de ter filhos ou não ter filhos. Essa também é uma história que se passa, como você bem define, numa sociedade patriarcal, né? E é também uma sociedade que admite a poligamia em algumas regiões, como você me explicou. Você poderia nos falar desses dois aspectos, o patriarcalismo e a poligamia? E uma pergunta que veio do público também pede que você comente sobre a influência da música na sua escrita.
Okay, I'll begin with a question about music because I was just thinking about that this morning. I listen to music when I write, particularly when I'm working on a first draft, which is usually pretty easy for me to sort of dance through, and then I come back over and over again to fine-tune what I've done. And I remember in 2012 when I was working on what was, I think, the second draft of this novel, I stumbled on a particular song on YouTube. There's a Nigerian musician called Asha, and she's amazing. I think she walks on water. And I found a live performance of one of her songs. The song is called Bamidele. And it's this mournful song about a relationship between a man and a woman. And it was one I'd always listened to, but so fortuitously, I stumbled upon that on YouTube and listened to it over and over and over again, such that the husband's character in this novel is actually named after the character in that song. So yeah, music has such a big part in my creative process. And in terms of the novel and some of the themes that come to the fore when you read it, for me, it began as a story, like I said earlier, that I had written this short story that was about 2,500 words. It was all dialogue. And I kept reading it again and again. I'll just summarize what the story was. It was the last fight in a marriage. So a couple is standing in their living room, and they have people moving the wife's property out of the building, and they're having this big argument. And I'd written all of the arguments down as a story, and I kept reading it and saying to myself, there's something they're not saying, I don't know what it is, but there's something else going on in this marriage that they can't talk about. And I remember I was in my final year in university at that time, as I said earlier, it was about 3 a.m., and I just took a walk. And I remember exactly where I was standing when I realized what was going on. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to weave that into the short story. And then I wove it in the short story under the assumption that they weren't having this difficult conversation because there were other people in the room. And then it came to me that what if they can't talk about it when it's just the two of them? And that's when I thought, oh, this has to be a novel. Like, okay, this is bigger than I thought it was initially. So that was my access point, you know. So I began from that moment, and it became a novel for me about silence, about what is inexpressible and what is difficult to articulate even when people feel that they're very much in love with one another. And as I began, of course, to write about love between a man and a woman, I would then come up against the question of patriarchy and the limits of love when society doesn't view the two of you as equal, and all the consequences that could come from that. In this particular case, it's a question of they can't have children. It's the woman who's always at fault. She's the one who has a problem. She's the one who has to go through the emotional and mental trauma of dealing with relatives, dealing with sort of being taught to be less than human because she can't conceive. And one of the solutions that the husband's family prefers is that he takes a second wife, which in 1980s Nigeria was something that was still being practiced in many parts of the country, that men would, for different reasons, take second wives, primarily because they could, you know, because they could get away with it. Yeah. And who wouldn't if they could, right? But with this particular story, it's a bit more complicated. And what I wanted to show was how even the man is sort of trapped in this system, because he really doesn't want to take the second wife, you know, but he is also trapped in this expectations of this is what it means to be a man, and this is what it means to be a woman, and this is the dynamic that should exist in your relationship, even if it doesn't necessarily work for you as individuals.
E também é muito bonito ver os dois personagens principais estudaram na universidade, moram em cidades grandes, mas mesmo eles, sobretudo ela, recorrem à religião popular, né? A influência da religião é muito forte no seu livro, não é? A tensão, né, com a influência.
Yes, definitely. I mean, so they fall in love in the university. And one of the ways that I talk about this novel is as a conversation. And that, I mean, you get both perspectives. You have Yejide's narrative, and then you have Akin's narrative. And you sort of begin the novel at the end. By the time you're in the first chapter, you know that the marriage fell apart, and they're both sort of looking over the course of this marriage. And so they fall in love in the university, but I mean, love is not enough. I suppose that's precisely the point, that by the time they get married, there are all these expectations. They're being pulled from different directions. And as I read in this excerpt, Yejide, for instance, even though she said to herself, you know, I don't believe in all these things, she decides, you know what do I have to lose if I'm under so much pressure, and this option, this religious alternative is available.
Thank you. Ayelet, no seu livro, conceitos como guerra e paz, conflito e liberdade são muito fortes, né? Eles perpassam a obra como um todo. Se não de uma maneira realista, ao menos como uma metáfora, né? Uma metáfora muito forte. Eles também são conceitos muito agudos para pensar a realidade de Israel nos dias de hoje. Você poderia comentar um pouquinho sobre a importância desses embates individuais dos seus personagens, esses embates subjetivos, e como, se eles dialogam ou não com a realidade que você vive e conhece em Israel nos dias de hoje?
I think what really fascinated me about this movement between the private and the global. I mean, between the war and peace in the country zone, in the state zone, and between the war and peace in the living room. Because this man, this real story of the man that held the woman against her will, it happened in a time where everybody was busy in the big things. When this woman wanted to break free and she said there was something wrong made to me, people told her, you know, we have a war going on, we want to have our independence, something is too important right now to take care of your own personal tragedy. And I think it often happens to especially to women, but also I think to other areas in the population until today in Israel, where people come and say, we suffer, and people tell them, okay, but can you please wait with your suffering until we finish the war and we finish anything, and then we can come back to you. So if you open a history book about this operation of Jewish men going to save Jewish women, then the history books will glorify this operation, and this real story will not be mentioned there, because nobody wanted to know this story. This story was like the backstage. In the front stage, you have the creation of Israel, which is a very mythological moment, and people like their mythologies to be clean. I mean, we like them to be bloody, but the blood of, you know, the big ethos or the big mythologies, like something bigger than ourselves, something noble, the clash between right and wrong, good and evil. And then in the backstage, there was the story of this little pathetic man that falls terribly in love with this woman that he could never get unless she was married to him by the force of religious law. And this shift between what's going on in the front stage and what's going on in the backstage, I was always fascinated about. I remember as a little kid when I heard the stories about the foundation of Israel. I think every country has its own mythology, like the stories we tell ourselves about how Brazil was established, how Israel was established, how the US was established. You know, these are stories that mothers tell to children, who tells their own children. We pass along these stories. And it's a very clear narrative that we like to hold. And then you have things that happen that don't fit this narrative. And then you face the question of, what do I do with the facts that don't fit the narrative that we like to tell ourselves about ourselves? Do I want to look at these facts, or do I want to just put them aside so that the narrative can keep on living? And Yaakov Markovich, my protagonist, he's not part of the heroic narrative that Israeli people like to tell ourselves about who we are. And other characters in the novel, some of them are much more, you know, like the Zionist macho, I mean, more man than he is, but they also have, once you get to know them, you find out that each one of them has his own secret. I mean, not just the biggest leaders have their own secret. Each person walking the street has this secret. And I think when you write them, when you try to write a character, you always start from the secret. What is it that this character will never tell a living soul, not his mother, not his brother, not himself? What is it that he will be willing to do everything to hide from himself and from the reader? And you aim to that point. You try to dance around this point of what is it that we don't want to talk about. And I think it's the same when you write a character, and I think it's also maybe the job not just of an author, but also as a psychologist. Like, you ask yourself when somebody comes to the room, what is it that he doesn't want to talk about? And maybe it's also the job of a journalist, because you ask, when you look at a politician, what is it that people try to avoid out of different interests, not just the cold interests of a politician, but also because we try to escape something very deep in ourselves that we're not ready to face yet.
Vocês viram que as duas falaram sobre segredo nas suas respostas, né? São dois livros que lidam muito com os não ditos, né? Com aquilo que é impossível de dizer, e toda vez que há muito segredo, sobra muito barulho, né? Então, eu queria começar perguntando para a Ayòbámi sobre... nós sabemos que você é uma discípula de grandes escritores nigerianos, como Chinua Achebe, né? Que escreveu o livro The World Falls Apart, e também da Chimamanda, que esteve aqui na Flip faz alguns anos, né? E eu queria entender, que você falasse um pouquinho mais como essa escola e você mesmo lidam com essa situação de guerra e paz também, mas agora na Nigéria.
I mean, with with this novel in particular, I mean, one of the things to begin with the other Nigerian writers that you mentioned is that, I mean, particularly in writing about the country, I felt with this novel a measure of freedom, because I could think of other books that had directly sort of engaged with the political questions, you know, of, say, dictatorship in 1980s in Nigeria. You could read Chinua Achebe's Anthems of the Savannah, for instance. So when I began to write this novel, because I'm also very interested in history, Nigerian history in particular, and I'd read a lot of books about the 80s, done quite a bit of research, and it was my first book, and I wanted it to be good. So the initial draft had a lot of politics in it, not because it was interesting, not because it was important to the novel, but just because I wanted the reader to know how much I had read, which is sort of a recipe for a bad novel. By the time I read it a couple more times, I realized that not only was it not working as fiction, the characters didn't care about all these things that I was making them do. I was making them become involved in politics when they really didn't care that much. And I then decided to sort of pare it down and take out what I, as the person who was a bit obsessed with Nigerian politics, really wanted to talk about, and figure out what are the characters going to talk about and what is the larger point that that makes. And so there's a sense in which you have all of these things going on in the background. You have the multiple coups d'etat sort of happening. But what you see happen with these characters, who are sort of middle-class Nigerians, right, is that they begin to insulate themselves as much as they can from the political realities. So there's more insecurity. They build walls, you know, they hire security because they can afford to. And it was one of the things that began also happening in 1980s Nigeria with the middle class, because you could not vote, and therefore the best you could do was protect yourself with whatever money that you had. So that was sort of my access point for the political and the personal. It was again to come down to what would these particular characters that I'm working with right now care about, and what would come to the fore in their lives. And as much as they try to protect themselves, what would be the limits of that protection? At what point would the failure of the state sort of impose on their own personal lives?
Ayelet, queria lhe perguntar sobre aromas. Né? No seu livro, a capa já trata disso, o cheiro de laranja é o aroma de Sônia. E Sônia encanta a todos por causa do seu cheiro, do cheiro que ela exala de laranja. Já o filho de Sônia cheira a pêssego. E o pai não gosta que ele tenha esse tipo de cheiro. O nosso Markovitch, ele não cheira nada, mas ele sonha com morangos. Então, você poderia falar um pouquinho para nós sobre essa geografia dos aromas que percorre o livro do começo até o final dele?
So I will say that when one of my friends read the novel for the first time, she said it was like eating a fruit salad because on each page you had a different fruit. But for me, the smell became from a conversation I had with my grandfather. I asked him, how did he fall in love with my grandmother? And he told me it was about the oranges, and I asked what oranges, and he said that she had the smell of an orange. Now, she never used a perfume of an orange, and everybody else you will ask will tell you that she doesn't have the smell of an orange. She has the smell of the perfume that she uses for the last 60 years. But for him, this is the smell that she had, and I thought that to argue with him or to challenge that would be like challenging the whole idea of love, because I think when you love somebody, then this someone has this specific smell, which is not an objective smell. This is the smell that is created, you know, when the meeting of two people, like in the air that is between two people who are close to each other. And then when I started to write the characters, there's always this moment that you want the character to feel real, not to be a character in a book, but to be somebody that you really believe that exists. And for me, it's always about the physical things. Like I ask myself, what item of clothes will my character take off first when she gets home? Is it her shoes? Is it her bra? Is it the dress? Like, what's the first thing that she takes off the moment she gets home? And until I know what is it exactly, I can't write the character. Like, I need to know the very specific details. And it was like this with the smell. And I thought Sonia is a character of a woman which is very, very sensuous. She's not very beautiful, but there is just something about her that drives everybody crazy. It drives her crazy too. And there was something about the smell of this woman that suddenly brought her into life, because I know how in my own life smell has such a powerful influence. I mean, we all remember things from our childhood. If we smell a certain smell that we used to have in our childhood, it can be the smell of a specific dish. Maybe the person who made this dish is not with us anymore, but when we smell the dish, we automatically feel as if we're thrown back in time to this specific moment. So I feel smell is like, it's like a hyperlink. You do double click and then you're somewhere else. And I really wanted to use the smell. But I also thought about a relationship when she has a child with her partner who is a very macho man, and suddenly the child has this smell of peaches. And for this man to have a woman smelling of an orange, that's nice. But to have a man smelling of peaches, that's a big no. And he's trying to take away the smell out of the child. And he's trying to get this boy to smell like boys are supposed to smell. And I thought about the way so many parents that I know, like the thing that you love about your partner, you hate it when it comes to your child, or how we can't accept different aspects of our child when our child doesn't fit the fantasy that we have. I think it was Winnicott, the psychoanalytic, he said that every woman or every man that has a child, they always carry two children. The one is the real child that they have, and the other is the imaginary child, the child that they dreamt about and talked about, and they had a concept of him for years. And then when you want to face your own child, you have to let go of all these fantasies and dreams you had about the child that will be yours. And the father of this child that smells like peaches, he can't meet his own child because he's too busy mourning the child that he was supposed to have but didn't. He got this one.
Vamos falar um pouquinho do tempo, né? Do tempo da história, nos livros de vocês duas. A Ayòbámi, ela tem uma narrativa muito sofisticada em que o tempo, ela já disse, é uma conversa, mas o leitor tem que ficar muito atento, porque nós vamos e voltamos no tempo, não é? Estamos em 2008, depois vamos lá para frente, voltamos de novo. Também ela troca os narradores. Então, é hora ele que fala, é hora ela que fala. E não existem explicações prévias. Não é? Como você definiria esse seu estilo?
I mean, with this particular novel, what I wanted to get was this feeling of a conversation happening, which was why it sort of went back and forth between the two characters. Initially, I sort of went with having the first 50% of the novel from the wife's perspective, and then the second 50% from the husband's perspective, which, if you've read the novel, wouldn't work for one very obvious reason. By the time you get to the end of a own narration, you hate him and you don't want to read this book anymore. And you just like, I don't care what this guy has to say for himself, I'm done. But I wanted him to have a say in, I really wanted the reader to also care about him. I didn't want you to sort of judge him as, this is just a terrible person, and I don't care what he has to say for himself. So when I came back to the manuscript, I started trying to see how I could place their narratives side by side. And it took a while. It was one of the things that made it difficult to complete the novel, because it was it had to be very precise. And it was really a series of failed attempts at writing it. You know, I would try one thing and it wouldn't work, and then I would go all over again and try it. And eventually I came upon this form, and it just fit perfectly. And I remember in my room then, I printed out the old manuscript, and I put all the chapters on the floor. And I would move the chapters and then read it again, and then take chapter 5 and bring it to the beginning and see how it worked. And there was just
Now I
this
got it.
yeah, it took a while.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can still remember I had everything on the floor, all this paper on the floor. And I remember reaching a certain point and reading everything and realizing if I move one chapter now, the book collapses. And I thought, okay, now I'm done with this book. I have to send it out. So the style for this book, it was really an attempt to get that conversation. And it was important for me to write in the language that I felt the characters themselves would use, not necessarily the language that I would use. So if you read the woman's character, she's a hairdresser. So in terms of the type of metaphors that she uses, she thinks about hair and she thinks about scarves, because those are the things she deals with every day. So it was trying to think through that language. So the language is very pared back. It's, as much as I could, very true to what I understood of them. So it was a novel in which I sort of almost had to take my own voice out of it and discover how these characters, these people would speak about their own lives.
Ayelet, você também usa a ideia, o livro é dividido em antes, durante, depois e depois de depois. Como o tempo funciona nessa sua narrativa aqui? Por que marcá-lo tão precisamente?
I remember when I was a child and the story ends, and I would always ask my mother, and what happened after? And whatever story she would read to me, I would say, but what happened after? And even if the dragon was dead and they were married, or the man was dead and the dragon was alive, or the woman, whatever constellation there was, I always had this question of what happened after. And when I grew up a little bit, I remember she told me, listen, you don't want to know what happened after. Because once you reach the end, the ultimate end of a good story, there is no, you don't want one word to be written after that. Because also in life, there's a famous version of an Israeli playwright called Ho Ho Yulia. It's about Romeo and Julia. What would have happened if Romeo hadn't died and they would stay together and would live Romeo and Julia like a marriage life, and we meet them again 20 years afterward as a marriage couple sitting in their living room. And it's a very tragical play. It's even more tragical than the original one. Because you see what happens after.
Yeah.
So when I think about the way Israel was founded, it was also told to my generation like this amazing story, like a fairy tale. The Jews wandered for 2,000 years. They didn't have a country. You had the Holocaust, and then out of this terrible misery came out, after 2,000 years of longing, the Jewish state. And it's supposed to be the end. But then you ask, but what happened after? And then it starts to get more complicated. So in One Night Markovitch, the first phase is Second World War, and the Jews don't even know if they're going to have a state or if almost the entire Jewish population is going to be wiped out by the Nazis. That's the before. And then you have during, and that's the War of Independence of Israel. And those people are fighting for their lives. And by this time, they just want this dream of 2,000 years of having a state to come true. They don't think about the Palestinians because for them, they are the heroes of the stories, and the other ones are the bad guys of the stories. And then you have a Jewish state. And in the story, this is the moment when all the characters in the story start to go a little bit crazy, because I think when you long for something for 2,000 years and you finally get it, or when you say we need a democracy for so many years, and then you get your democracy, getting what you want, you think it's the end, but actually it's just the beginning. And I think getting what you want after 2,000 years of longing is bound to make you a little bit crazy. So the last part of the novel of One-Eyed Markovich is after the after. It's what happens after the man gets the woman, but against her will. What happens after the Jews get their land and find out it's a little bit more complicated. What happens when the other character suddenly gets the child he always wanted from the woman who smells like oranges, but it's not the child he dreamt about. It's like this big question for me about time, is the what happens after.
Ayòbámi, eu gostaria de conversar agora com as duas sobre questões de gênero. Imagino que vocês são frequentemente questionadas sobre isso. Não questionadas, mas recebem perguntas a esse respeito. O romance da Ayòbámi, que chama-se Fique Comigo. E enquanto eu lia o Fique Comigo, eu sempre pensava se era a personagem principal que dizia Fique Comigo, ou se era o personagem principal, ou se eram ambos. Qual é o significado de tratar de ter como principal protagonista uma mulher que estudou, uma mulher que faz questão de trabalhar, mas que, de alguma maneira, com as suas dificuldades, ao engravidar, ela vai cada vez mais se incluindo nessa sociedade onde a poligamia é o segredo mais conhecido do país, não é? Poderíamos me falar um pouquinho sobre esse tema?
Yes, I mean, the title Stay With Me, it's sort of something that all the characters say to each other. I mean, the man says it to the woman says it to the man, and they say it to their children when they do eventually have children. Because, I mean, as Ayelet said, they both want children for a very long time, and then they have children, and, you know, it's not the end of the story. It's not quite what they expect. In sort of coming to this novel, again, it was really about the characters. But I think that if you're really honest with yourself as a writer, as much as you try to take yourself out of a story, your concerns will always in some way come through. The questions that you generally ask yourself will some way come through. So, I mean, growing up in Nigeria as a young child, I was one of those kids that hardly ever said anything. I was very quiet. My mom had 5 sisters. She has 5 sisters. And we used to have a lot of them in the house, you know, from time to time. And, you know, they would get together and they would talk about everything, you know, that you can imagine. And maybe I was about 3 or 4. But because I was very quiet, I think they always forgot I was in the room. So they would say things that I probably should not have heard. And I would sit down there and just listen because I loved stories. But I started sort of asking myself questions about some of the stories they would tell. And one of the stories that was very common for me to hear were stories about maybe a friend of theirs who had been married for all these years and did not have any children. And, you know, there were all these narratives about women putting a calabash in their stomach and sort of tying a wrapper and going around and looking as if they were pregnant. And of course, after 9 months, you know, there's a limit to how long you can carry on with that pretense. But one of the things I started asking myself very early on was, but what if these women are not lying? You know, what if they really think they're pregnant? And by the time I started writing this novel, it was one of the things that I immediately put in the novel. And eventually I went to sort of do research, like, oh, is this possible in science? And I rediscovered all the scientific basis for a woman who has been under so much pressure about getting pregnant to suddenly the mind tricks the body into being convinced that she's actually pregnant. And so that was one of the concerns that I had in writing this book. And it was sort of rooted in the fact that as a young girl, it became very quickly apparent to me what was expected of me, which was grow up, get married, and have children. You know, it's in some ways it was that simple. And I started questioning, what if I don't want that? Or what if I can't do that? What position would I then have in this society? What position would I then have in this community? And I think that's one of the things that informs this character of Yejide, of how, even though she's very well educated and she has her own business, the fact that she still doesn't have a child, she's sort of less the respect that she has in society is not as much as if she has children. Another story I remember from growing up is being, say, on a bus, going somewhere as a teenager, and someone would be insulting a woman, maybe a woman who's like in her mid-30s or in her 40s, and people would defend the woman by saying, why are you talking to her like that? That's somebody's mother. And on the surface it sounds really nice, like you're standing up for this person. But I quickly began to ask myself, so what if she's not somebody's mother? Does it mean that it's okay for her to be talked to like that? So that's one of the things I wanted to sort of explore in this novel, the way that in Nigeria in particular, in this community that I grew up in, motherhood is mythologized. It's this great and wonderful thing. And I wanted to look at, but what if it's not as great and as wonderful as we've been told it has been? And what is the complication of always only putting women on this pedestal?
Thank you. Ayelet, a mesma pergunta sobre gênero. Eu sei que muitas vezes já lhe perguntaram sobre essa coisa, e lendo as entrevistas, eu vi que a maioria das pessoas que lhe entrevistaram afirmam que os personagens masculinos são mais fortes que os femininos. Já eu mesma não tenho tanta certeza, né? Raquel, Bela, Sônia, elas competem bastante no protagonismo com o Schorer, com Zev Feinberg e com o próprio Yakov Markovitch. E, além deles, o triste vice-comandante, um eterno e silencioso apaixonado, não é? Qual a tua opinião? Esse romance poderia se chamar também Uma Noite Bela Zegerman, ao invés de Zach Markovitch?
I always, when I talk about Markovitch, it's always very difficult, because this is exactly the situation, that you have, on the one hand, Markovitch, he's the one holding her, so he's the protagonist because he's the one doing something. And she's the one who was supposed just to sit there and wait until he lets her go free. She's like the captive, and the captive is usually less interesting than the jailer. But when I wrote this, I thought, I don't want him to be just a sadistic jailer, but I don't want her to be the captive. I have a little girl, and when I read her stories, I always think, stories for little girls. Half of the girls there are unconscious, half of the story. Like in Sleeping Beauty, it's called in English.
Yeah.
It's a story about, like, there's a girl, but she's lying down half of the story. And in Snow White, it's a story about a girl, but she's also unconscious half of the story. And then Ariel, the mermaid, she's awake, but then she doesn't speak for half of the story because she wants to get the prince, so she gives away her voice. So most of the stories that I know about girls, Cinderella is awake and she can sleep, but she cleans the house all the time. So most of the stories that I grew up about and that I'm telling my little girl right now are not stories with the female characters that I want her to grow up on. You have Little Red Riding Hood, she goes into the forest and she's awake and she's not cleaning, but because she goes into the forest, she gets eaten. So I think it's quite a journey to be a girl in this world right now. And I wanted Bella and Sonia, my female characters, to be awake, that's the first rule, not unconscious, to be able to speak, and hopefully not to be swallowed for eternity in the stomach of a wolf. And when you write it, you start to face many questions. Like, I think what I was asked the most in Israel was about the sexuality of the female characters. They said that the book there's a lot of sexuality in it. And I thought, if it was a male character, then it was quite obvious that it will be that he wants to have sex and he goes and he does it. But when it's a female character and you want her to enjoy her body and not be punished for that, then you have to justify yourself, because literature is full of female characters who go and have sex but then die a terrible death. You have Anna Karenina, which goes with her heart, and then it's a spoiler, but in the end she gets run over by a train. Or you have Madame Bovary, and she goes with her heart. So I would say about Madame Avril also that she follows her heart and she ends up a very visual death. And I wanted my female characters to celebrate their bodies and to have like a very erotic life, which don't always come with a terrible, terrible price. And I found those questions to be, they always made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, as if you're writing about sexuality with a female protagonist, then you're doing something wrong, or you have to justify yourself. Well, for a man, it's like, you don't have to justify it. It's like, why not?
Eu tenho... Nós não temos, infelizmente, muito tempo, e eu queria combinar uma pergunta que veio do público com uma pergunta que eu gostaria de fazer. A pergunta seria originalmente para a Ayelet, mas eu queria que vocês duas respondessem. Penso que nós três aqui vivemos num momento com governos autoritários, né? Governos que têm sido chamados de democraduras, porque são eleitos, né, regularmente, democraticamente, mas na prática eles atuam como governos, por vezes populistas, muitas vezes autoritários. A pergunta para a Ayelet, depois vou fazer para a Ayòbámi também, é se você faz uma ligação entre o homem que se sente proprietário de alguém que não lhe pertence e a situação de disputa de terras entre Israel e Palestina. E para você, eu gostaria de lhe perguntar se você também, a situação, você me contou ontem, né, do governo militar, autoritário que vocês têm agora na Nigéria, e se essas relações tão difíceis entre esses dois personagens, relações que não têm um final, também seriam uma forma, uma alusão a essa situação política tão problemática, um país que viveu tantas guerras e agora vive uma paz, mas nesses termos. Quer começar, Ela?
I think, for me, One Night Markovitch is a novel about the way we easily confuse between love and obsession, or love and possession. And I think it's true for the characters, and I very often feel it about the Israeli state. And I think the way Markovitch justifies himself by saying, I am a man that has nothing. I am the man that you never remember his face. I am the man that nobody really cared about, and now I got this thing and I can't let go of it. So because of my past, I have to be as strong as I can in the present. And I think some parts of the Israeli society right now feel this way, that because we were the outsiders of history for so many years, and because we were the victims for so many years, this makes us entitled to do the things we do right now. Or some people think that we are still the victim right now, and I don't think that's the case. I think it's more complicated. So yes, I do see Markovitch as a novel, as a love story, but also as something that can be read in a political level. I believe all novel can and should be read also on a political level. I sometimes feel uncomfortable by questions like this because they make me think that I don't want a novel to be a political statement. When I want to say a political statement, I write a column, or I sign a petition, or I go to demonstrate. I think literature has to be more complex than the petitions that I sign or the signs I carry in demonstrations, because I want literature not to just say this is good, this is bad, but to try to understand the motivations of every sort of human behavior. And I think after we do that in a novel, then we can go back to the street, because we have to, at one point, put the novel down, get out to the street and try to change things in the street. We have the deeper understanding that we get from literature, but then we do go to reality and say, this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so while I was reading sort of different parts of Nigerian history, the 1980s in particular felt very apt for this particular narrative between a couple. So I'll give you like a crash course in Nigerian history, very imperfect crash course. So in late 1980s, we have Nigeria is under a military dictatorship. And I mean, coincidentally, the first coup that you have in the novel is the one that housed Muhammadu Buhari who Nigerians have now elected as democratic president. You can make of that what you will. But in the 1980s, Muhammadu Buhari is ousted, and a new leader, Ibrahim Babangida, comes in. And by then, I think I was born in 1988, so I wasn't old enough to know. But, sort of reading about the past, I would think, was everybody crazy? Like, why were they so enthralled by this guy? Because it's someone who would sort of take Nigeria into one of its darkest moments. But literally, when he visits cities, people line on the streets, to wave at him. My parents even went. Like, my mother still talks about it, like, what were we thinking? But of course, by the time I then went back to read more about it, it was more of a gradual process. It wasn't that he came into power and he then said, I'm going to kill all the journalists, It's that he came into power and it was a more complicated relationship with the country, that there were things that were obvious about him from the beginning, but that people did not necessarily want to acknowledge. So you sort of took him as this charming, nice guy. And in terms of also the novel, there's a sense in which this relationship begins almost like a fairy tale. They fall in love at first sight, and they're supposed to live happily ever after, but it's not that simple. And if it were that simple, I wouldn't have a novel, so I'm happy it's not that simple. So there's a sense in which the marriage is sort of speaking to the political moment, and the political moment is, in a sense, speaking to the marriage. But that is, for me, always secondary, because it's always the characters. And I think that when you drill into the characters and you do that well, they can have all forms of symbolism, to politics, to religion, to mythology, but begin always, with the people themselves.
Agora, a minha última pergunta, que vem do público, é uma pequena contravenção aqui. Vou mais uma vez dar as costas ao Guilherme e à Fernanda para fazer essa última pergunta. Há uma pergunta muito bonita, a pergunta, acredito que é da Sofia, que ela pergunta o seguinte: enquanto vocês escreviam momentos tristes, como a morte de personagens, vocês alguma vez choraram? A queima-roupa e rapidinho.
Specifically in this book, the death of one character is based on the death of somebody from my family. So when I wrote this one, I knew that I have to go to this point, but I couldn't go through this page. I just rewrote the page again, and I couldn't do it. I felt if it, like in this magical thing, like I felt I can't do it again. I can't make the characters suffer what I know that people suffer when they lose someone. I'm not selling food, but I just felt it was, I got stuck, I think, for at least a month. With this, because it was very, very hard. And when my family read it, so they had to face with all the sexuality and people asking, how can your daughter write such a thing about sex and women? And then after dealing with this, they had to deal, when they got to the last pages of the novel, with this. So it was very hard for them. But I think also after that, I realized that this is something, if you care enough about your characters when you write them, then I guess, yes, you cry. I mean, you put something of you, of the people you love, of like the things you cherish the most, you put it in there. So when you say goodbye, it's for real, it feels for real.
One of the inspirations for this novel was a friend of mine who sort of passed on around that time when I was in my final year in the university. And so some of the characters that die in this novel, I was definitely thinking about her during that time and the way she suffered, from the disease that she had. So yeah, it was hard to write, and there were times when I did not want to finish the book, precisely because I did not want to go through those feelings, you know, of going with these characters through this terrible pain and then terrible loss. But it felt like, I just felt like I had to power through it in some way and come out on the other hand, you know.
Bom, vou ter que terminar essa conversa com testemunhas, não é? Agradecer muito as perguntas de vocês e dizer que as duas autoras vão autografar os seus livros aqui na livraria. Muito obrigada.